I'm here to introduce the next section, which is a sort of state of the nation on data. I've only got 10 minutes, so it's going to be difficult to give a full state of the nation on data, but I'll do what I can. It's obviously a great pleasure to be invited to this conference, and the wonderful thing about it is you obviously get to see an insight in some of the latest thinking. So some of that I'm going to reference for you today. But as an agency, we always look at things through the lens of behavioral science, so I'm going to apply some of that. But broadly speaking, there are 4 key themes that I'm going to talk to. The first one is that we need to move beyond short-termism. The second one is we've got to, as an industry, embrace a stronger data culture. The third one is that we need to think about triangulation of data. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And then a quick view on some of the future metrics that I think are going to be influential. So I'm going to take you through those now. There was a report by IDC recently that's talked about the growth of data, and we've all sort of referenced and seen these things. But IDC established by 2025 there will be 175 zettabytes of data captured. Now, that's difficult for everyone to imagine what a zettabyte is. A zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes, but even then you can't really imagine it. But David Rensil, the vice president of IDC, references an analogy which is quite interesting, that if you stored all the world's data on Blu-ray discs and then stacked them high, you would reach to the moon 23 times. Now, the other thing that's interesting, if you actually double that, that would be achieved in the middle of 2027. So the growth of this data is running at 61%. So it's not going away. We've got to move to a different level. And one of the challenges that I think is really big for us is the fact that Daniel Kahneman describes it as WYSIATI. What you see is all there is. And this is a big challenge because basically people think about what they see and what's easy for them to access. And digital data has driven a lot of the way that we think in the short term because it's very readily available. We also look at the data that our peers have done in the past. And therefore there's a lack, I think, of innovation in the way that we think of it. But more importantly, there is this danger that we're falling into that Abba actually referenced a bit earlier on today in the panel that Sue had, which is a spin and bin mentality. The fact that we react so quickly to some of the metrics that we're seeing, I think is a big challenge for us. Now, if we're talking about that 175 zettabytes of data, one of the things that we've got to think about is the fact that over 50% of that is going to be generated on the Internet of Things. And the thing that that's going to bring is that this is going to be real time. So 30% of the data that we are using in 2025 will be immediate. And so therefore we'll be looking at it in the sort of microsecond of short-termism. And this is great, it's a fantastic opportunity, but you've got to blend the different metrics. And this short-term approach, I know Les might talk to this a little bit later on, has been evidenced quite clearly from the work that Peter Field and Les Binet have done, which looks at the decline in long-term effectiveness of advertising. And in fact, in Cannes this year, there was a survey done of 70 of the largest marketeers, and these are people who generally present themselves as very positive, but even they are saying that 37% feel that advertising, the awareness advertising is decreasing in its effectiveness. And this is a deliberately complicated chart because there's no way of presenting it otherwise, so apologies for that. But this is the Gartner hype cycle. And what it does is look at emerging technologies. And this is released at the end of 2018, and it's very specific to marketing and digital marketing and advertising industry. But what's interesting, it looks at the sort of hyperbole, if you like, or hyperbola, that's associated to innovation triggers. So an emerging technology, there's a lot of talk and conversation about this emerging technology that builds up to this, what they call peak of inflected expectations, everyone talking about it. But then they start practicing it, and in reality, they fall into what they call the trough of disillusionment. So and if you move to the next slide, you can see data-driven marketing sits very much in that decline and falling into that trough of disillusionment. And I think, personally, that it's because we are reacting really quickly in the short term and not looking at sort of blending the long-term metrics. I think we're also quite a long way from that plateau of productivity on the right. And if you start asking businesses in terms of whether they trust the data that you're producing, only 21% of businesses in the UK actually trust that the data analytics, fully the data analytics that they're using. And this is creating a need for us to build a data culture. And there's a number of surveys that I'm referencing here, but I went to a really good presentation from Tableau, which was very specifically about data culture in businesses. And one of the stats that I'm pulling from this is 17% of people are data literate in businesses. That's how people actually thinking about it. And only 50% of new entrants into businesses are actually ready for a data world. And this is a big challenge for us, and I think something that the IPA and all of the industry bodies really need to think about addressing is how do we encourage that sort of STEM increase in terms of our data literacy. And if you think about how humans make decisions, it's never one thing, right? It's always multifaceted. So if someone's making a purchasing decision, they'll be looking at the sort of magnitude of potential risk and reward. They'll be looking at the social influences, and there'll even be things, you know, from our physiology around dopamine release that's going to affect the way that we make a decision. And we need to think about this from a data perspective. So I've referenced something from that Denise Turner said to me when I was researching this from Newsworks. She talks about triangulation of data. And I'm a keen walker. And we did a company walk the other day, and my colleague here who led it actually, because I was unfortunately not able to come. But the point being with triangulation is that you know where you are at any one point. So you need 3 different data points of reference. And I think that's quite a nice analogy to think about how you can pull different data sets together to make sure that they're pointing to where you're going. The most important thing about the data that you use, though, is that they all ladder up to a very clear objective. At the moment, a lot of people use lots of different data that's quite disparate, and they're not actually thinking about how that ladders up to a single goal. And the challenge for us is that the new is always dangerous, and people don't believe it. And so using Arthur C. Clarke's third law, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. There will be naysayers in this space who will say, no, but you've got to challenge that. And I think we have to be braver in bringing in new mixes of technology. Now I've done the classic here of turning 5 slides into one, so I'll try and do this quickly for pressure of time. There's really interesting nascent technology coming from Montreal University and a company which has got a terrible name, EMAWW. But anyway, it's all around the emotions of touch. And I think this is interesting because we can all reference the time how frustrated we've been with a phone and how we're tapping it fast. But when you actually, looking at a subject that you desire or love, the strokes and the way that you engage with your phone is very different. So this is really interesting space that I think will emerge over the next few years. Something that's working exceptionally well for us is personalities. We're seeing 40% increase in terms of conversion by targeting people based on personalities. And this is important because people who are extroverted like very different things from those that have a high level of neuroticism. So you've got to think about approaching and talking to these people very differently. And it fundamentally changes the way that you think about media and marketing. Some work that Facebook and Verity, I've seen Verity here today, she's over there, we'll talk to you about a little bit more, is how they are calibrating different methodologies and reimagining that thinking. So one of the things that they're doing with marketing mix modeling is using daily data instead of weekly data, which obviously changes the way that we should review it. But the important thing is then think about proxies for long-term growth. And there's, in their paper, the 3 grand challenges, Google talk about using search as a proxy for growth. And we found this a very clear indication that if you look at organic search, you can actually start to see growth appear off the back of it. So as a proxy for that you can read in the short term for long-term sales growth, organic search, I think, is a really good one. And the final one is humour and attention. So this is biometrics, basically using facial coding and things like galvanic skin response. There was a study done through Ehrenberg-Bass and Mars that identified the two key drivers in advertising is humour and attention. We could all probably guess that, but they've been able to quantify it. And actually looking and thinking about how biometrics can actually affect the way that we're making decisions in terms of what we run and where we run it, I think is really important. So I don't know whether that was 10 minutes. Maybe it was probably not far off. Key themes were we've got to blend short-term and long-term. I think as an industry, we've got to embrace a much stronger data culture. The triangulation of data is fundamental to our success. So think about things that are actually going to pinpoint where you are using multiple data sets and encourage people to use the new. So thank you very much.